whilst we know that people are important for food systems transformation, we must also acknowledge an inconvenient truth about our own role, that as a species, half of the habitable land on Earth is used to produce the food that we eat. Up to 1/3 of that land is degraded, threatening the long-term sustainability of our food systems. And moreover, up to 2/3 of biodiversity loss worldwide is attributed to food and land use activity, and 1/3 of greenhouse gases can be attributed to food and land use. Today, up to 800 million people are facing significant hunger, and after years of that number plateauing, even going down, actually it's going up significantly. So there is absolutely no doubt that agri-food systems are a major part of the problem. But also what's exciting today and what we're going to hear about is the potential for those same food systems to be a huge part of the solution. And we need to think of food and land use as massive systems enablers for addressing some of these incredibly wicked and challenged problems that we're facing today as they relate to climate change and all these other issues. Given that it cuts across not just the environment, but the whole economy, rural economies, right through to health and the way that we live our daily lives, because we all eat, and it's something that we do every day and we're passionate about. But often the piecemeal and siloed way that we've approached the challenge to date has meant that this has not been addressed substantially. So we really need to create a joined-up global approach in how we do this that encompasses the whole food system. And this will require us being highly innovative in the way that we work together, to listen to each other, to address some of those really tough questions about how we work with food. And critically, putting people first, particularly the farmer at the centre of that solution design of what we mean by food system transformation in a way that engenders hundreds of millions of farmers, not just a few, into the whole change process, and that they are with us on the journey. And this is not just a hypothetical number. At the World Economic Forum, we're actually working on a 100 million farmer initiative that catalyses action towards transition for net zero nature positive food systems by 2030 and sets out a global ambition, but also supports a wide array of local solutions, particularly in parts of the world like Africa, which really are the ones that are at the coalface of climate change and the impact that that's having. And in a way that incentivises farmers and empowers consumers to place climate, nature and resilience at the heart of the food economy. So my name's Sean DeClean. I'm a member of the Executive Committee of the World Economic Forum, and I'm absolutely delighted by the panel that we have today. Idris and Sabrina Elba, who are both UN Goodwill Ambassadors for the International Fund for Agriculture and Development. Welcome. Vanessa Nakate, who's, well done, you've struck a great voice as a climate justice activist over the last few days, which is fantastic to watch. M. Sanjayan, CEO of Conservation International. Gilbert Wambo, President of the International Fund for Agricultural Development. And Agnes Kalabata, President of AGRA, but also importantly, the Special Envoy for the United Nations Food Summit that took place just recently. So, Idris, maybe if I turn to you. I mean, on a cold, wet sort of Saturday, you know, why are you at COP? What are you looking to get from the leaders at COP26 and from world leaders?
Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming out today. Look, you know, if you're anything like me and you see a well-known face or a celebrity, you know, in a forum like this, you sort of wonder why they're there sometimes, and maybe, like me, you might be a little irritated by it. But I'll tell you why I'm here, why we're here, is because this conversation around food is something that needs to be really amplified. And one thing I've got is a big mouth. So that's what I'm using it for. One of the things that strikes me during the worst times of the pandemics is when we saw Western countries with their civilians lining up for food. These are families that have homes, that don't have farms, that live in the West, live in LA, live in London, live in England, and they're lining up for food because there was a food shortage. Now that wasn't because of climate change, it was because the supply chain was damaged. But the supply chain is going to be damaged if we don't figure out what to do around climate change and what it's doing to our food systems. That image of all those lines of people in LA lining down with families waiting for food is a reality for us in the future if we don't find ways to tackle this issue now. That's what I'm doing here. That's why Sabrina and I work with IFAD, because IFAD for a long time has been focusing on small-scale farmers. Small-scale farmers deliver 80% of the food that we eat. We don't recognize that when we go into Sainsbury's or Marks and Spencer's. It's not obvious to us, but it is obvious to them because every year when they put their crops in, the crops are lower because the rain's different, the soil's different. And one day, we're going to go to Sainsbury's, Marks and Spencer's, and the food's not going to be there. So for perspective, that's why this needs to be amplified. Vanessa's here today, and I wanted to invite Vanessa to come and speak with us because, you know, one of the things I asked Vanessa was about who's leading the conversation. And it was clear that as a young person with the most activism, she's not leading the conversation. I think we need to draw a line and say that leadership isn't about age. Vanessa is young, but isn't in the rooms where these decisions are being made. And that's why she's here today, to hopefully use her voice as a young leader to amplify the very same messages that are affecting her country in Uganda. So please, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Vanessa Nakate.
Over to you. I mean, there was a lovely quote in the paper saying that those often on the front pages of talking about climate change are not necessarily the ones on the front lines of, you know, the ones that are impacted on it. But I mean, you've been handed the baton very nicely there by Idris. I mean, you know, what do you want to get out of COP, particularly, you know, when we're talking about hundreds of millions of smallholder farmers, you know, in the world who are facing this reality of climate change every day?
Thank you so much, Idris and Sabrina. Hi, my name is Vanessa Nakate. I am a climate justice activist from Kampala, Uganda, a country that has one of the fastest changing climates in the world. In my relatively short lifetime, I have witnessed that my fellow citizens are already suffering some of the most brutal impacts fueled by the climate crisis. Historically, Africa is responsible for only 3% of global emissions. And yet, in Uganda, like many countries across Africa, the climate crisis is already causing withering droughts, catastrophic floods, and devastating landslides. Many Africans have lost their lives, while countless more have lost their homes, farms, and businesses. The droughts and floods have left nothing behind for the people, nothing except for pain, agony, suffering, starvation, and death. We are watching farms collapse and livelihoods lost due to drought, floods, and swarms of locusts. Climate change has disrupted weather patterns in countries like mine, causing shorter and heavier rainy seasons, plus longer dry seasons. Farms are being washed away by heavy rains, destroying crops. Crops are getting burnt in intense dry seasons. We saw the locust invasion in countries like Kenya, eating everything they came across in the farms. The climate crisis means hunger and death for many people in my country and across Africa. This is not a hypothetical situation. Food scarcity is an existential threat right now. The climate crisis is leaving millions of people hungry because there is no food. The emissions creating global heating are not just coming from coal-fired power plants and diesel and petrol vehicles. Agriculture and land use together is about 25% of our global emissions, Nitrogen fertilizers for food production threaten our chances to keep global temperatures from rising more than 1.5 or even 2 degrees. The animal agriculture industry alone accounts for up to 15% of global emissions. 83% of the world's cultivatable land is used to feed livestock, yet livestock only provide 18% of our calories. If we were to change towards a plant-based diet, we could save up to 8 billion tons of CO2 a year. Of course, not everyone has the ability to make such changes, but most of us could do something. And it is those who have the most power who also have the most responsibility. Our leaders need to start aligning their policies with the science to help us drastically reduce emissions towards zero starting now. But in addition, just one more minute, please.
Absolutely. Yep.
But in addition to reaching zero carbon, we must also reach zero hunger. According to the UN, more than 820 million people did not have enough to eat in 2018. That is 1 in every 9 people in the world, and that number continues to rise. Some of the key drivers of hunger and food insecurity include conflict, instability, and climate change. Conflict and instability have increased and spiraled, triggering greater population displacement, which leads to a greater demand for food in places where there is already a shortage. On top of this, climate change is affecting agricultural productivity, food production, and natural resources. The climate crisis is a food crisis, and the food crisis is a humanitarian crisis. There is no climate justice without ensuring that there is food justice. And what I have come to understand is that people need to be at the center of the conversation about this crisis, because people matter, we matter. The child going hungry at night matters. The mom who has to walk long hours to find water to look for food for her family matters. The farmer who watches his fields wither and his family suffer matters. So I say this to the leaders: stop investing in fossil fuels, stop digging up and burning fossil fuels, and stop forcing fossil fuels back into the ground where we grow the food that sustains us. Thank you.
Thank you. It's wonderful to hear that passion coming through, and just, and just putting food right at the center of this, and people right at the center of this. So really well done. Sabrina, you're passionate about this, and you listen to the passion that comes through from someone like Vanessa. It'd be really interesting to, what it is about being a goodwill ambassador for IFAD, that is important to you, and why actually the sort of being able for those people who put food on our plate every day, we often don't hear about, and why that is so important, to be thinking about and to taking into consideration.
Thank you, Vanessa. That was beautiful. Thank you so much. I think it's so important for voices like yours to be heard fully through. I came sort of across IFAD through my mother, who grew up in a rural area in Somalia and understood the importance of agriculture. And when she first told me about IFAD, I don't think I understood all the connectivities that I do today, and how important it is to invest in the small-scale farmers that we're talking about, the people who are really at the front lines, but are also the custodians of this earth, who protect us through protecting nature, through knowledge that they possess that surpasses so much that we know and have to catch up with in terms of what our scientists say, because they really do hold the key. I think people really are at the heart of it, and I appreciate Vanessa's sentiment on that, and it's really people that we fight for. We visited, and we're lucky to visit, Sierra Leone just at the beginning of, just before lockdown. Ironically, after they had come through a bout of Ebola. At the time, I had no idea that we would then be going through a pandemic globally, but to see the work that IFAD did on the ground and how they stayed the course after the pandemic, to be able to support these farmers and bring them back to a position where they could support themselves, really strengthened my belief in IFAD. And I stand here proudly today, or I sit here proudly today, advocating for them, and it's something I'm quite passionate about. I hope the next couple days, the past couple days really leads to something fruitful and tangible for the people who need it now. The crisis that Vanessa is referring to is happening at this very moment. For some of us, it's easy to sit back and know that it'll happen years down the road. But there are people who literally cannot cope now. So I am hopeful. I look forward to change. And I guess we'll just have to sit tight and see.
Thank you. So, really nice finishing on a message of hope as well. And I mean, Sanjay, we often get very siloed in how we address this. There was a food summit last month, we talk about food there. This is climate summit now, we talk about climate. We don't, but you've been passionate about breaking the silos, looking at how if we invest in nature and biodiversity, it'll transform the way that we think about sustainable and fairer food systems.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, and thank you all for being here and inviting me to speak briefly. So as I'm sitting here, I'm hearing this whole tent start to creak, and the wind's buffeting it outside, and I'm thinking to myself, I hope this all stays up. And there's this little moment in my heart of doubt, of insecurity. That's what a farmer feels if you are in Sudan or Cambodia or Sierra Leone. When the weather pattern changes, something they've never seen in their lives or their parents' lives or their grandparents' lives. And that little stagger, that little moment of insecurity, of despair, really can lead to complete loss of life and ultimately migration. It's the migrant crisis that we talk about, ultimately an agricultural crisis, it's a food crisis. The climate is changing. People who have unbelievable wisdom about how they grow and how they use their land, their own knowledge is framed. There's no way we're going to get to where we need to get to with the Paris Climate Agreement, a 1.5 degree target or threshold, without having an agricultural revolution. And for that agricultural revolution to really impact the people we're talking about, people in the countries that Conservation International works in, for example, it has to work with small-scale farmers, people on the front lines of conservation and in food production. So agriculture drives about 70% of the deforestation you see today. It produces about 25% of the global greenhouse gas emissions that we see today, and about 65% of the biodiversity loss, that crisis that we talk about. It's interesting at this COP, the one thing I will say, it is different at this COP, that there is this combining or intersectionality of these different issues, because I think we're coming to realize that we're not going to solve the climate crisis without also solving the food crisis and the agricultural transformation to regenerative agriculture, to more people-friendly agriculture. And we can't do that one at a time. We have to do that together. Thank you.
So Agnes Kalibata, I mean, your own personal story is one, which is wonderful in its own right. But I mean, listening to this, I mean, how will transforming food systems for the world's 500 million smallholder farmers also help us then to tackle this challenge of a climate crisis and a food crisis and the agricultural revolution that that we're talking about, but putting people right at the heart of this?
Thank you, Sean. And it's really good to be among people that are talking about smallholder farmers and what we could do differently. I mean, I grew up on a farm. I went to school because my parents farmed. So I know that it's possible to actually have a livelihood out of smallholder farming. I worked in a country where I was given the opportunity to change the lives of smallholder farmers. So it's possible. The problem today is however much you work, however hard you work, smallholder farmers are working against a cliff called climate change. Their lives are slowly the opportunity for a change in their livelihoods are slowly being taken back. Now, the opportunity that the Food Systems Summit did bring here was the fact that we could actually come to the world and discuss this as a world, help people understand that things that are happening very far is impacting people in Africa. Africa contributes very little to climate change. But African farmers, even this young lady, Vanessa, that just presented, if she has a kid this year or has a young baby this year, she's been living through a climate impact on food systems of about 30%. even if we did nothing today, I mean, even if we really managed to stop climate change today, Vanessa's kid will have 70%, will live against 70% more heat loss, more heat damage to smallholder farming. So really, the opportunity here is we need to understand that there's a community out there that depends on us taking action today. That's what we were trying to help everybody understand in the Food Systems Summit. It's within our control. If we don't do it today, we miss the opportunities that the food system actually does put in our midst. The food system is a $12 trillion industry that can be harnessed if we go green, that can be harnessed if we find ways of reducing waste, that can be harnessed if we find new ways of feeding people. So my appeal is that we actually do understand that everything we do, we are very interconnected in our world, and things we do from different parts of the world impact people in other parts of the world that are really, really in vulnerable places and can't do anything about it. I hope that the next COP, Sean, COP27, is going to be about food and food systems, and understanding that without fixing food systems, Africa has no future, smallholder farmers have no future, and we can't fix the question of climate change unless we fix our food systems. So thank you again.
No, thank you, Agnes. And thank you for your inspired leadership over the course of the Food Systems Summit as well. Gilbert, the last word with you. I mean, a strong appeal from Agnes, keeping food right at the centre of the next COP. I mean, what is it that you really feel, in terms of investing into small-scale farmers that we need from world leaders now as we move forward and really turn this into action?
Thank you so much, and good morning to you all. Let me just compliment what all my colleague panelists have brilliantly said. What I want to come back from is to recall that at the end of the day, when we talk about the climate change, the first to pay the price are those small-scale producers that we are talking about. So it's going to be important, while we know that ultimately mitigation is key, we have to keep in mind that mitigation will only give us the impact 20, 30 years from now. But our small-scale producers, it is now that they are suffering. We're talking about the need for us to have irrigation. We talk about the need for improved seed, without a need for weather information, for better water management today. So it's very critical, particularly that we know that for every $18 that we spend on migration, mostly from the private sector, only $1 is spent on adaptation. So this COP, Sean, it is a matter of credibility. Quite frankly, when I look at the logo, the CC, I wonder if it's climate change or credibility COP that we should be talking about. If we really want to make that difference, it's very critical for us to keep the adaptation side. And particularly, even that small amount that goes to adaptation, only 1.7% is gone to those small-scale farmers. So it's going to be important that we ensure that investment is really targeted those small-scale farmers so that they can, as Agnes has have said, make sure that they can increase their livelihoods while, and I want to borrow the expression from Sanjay, we're talking a few minutes ago, making sure that protection and production can live side by side. Thank you.
Brilliant. Powerful stuff. Well, if you're not excited enough about food being a critical part of climate change, then I think somehow we've missed out there, because that was that was very powerful. So the purpose of being here today is to allow you as the press to ask questions. Maybe if you put up your hand, you say where you're from, which agency you're from. I might take a couple of questions in a batch to allow people on the panel to respond. So we'll get a microphone to you. So just your name and agency.
Sure, Frank Jordan's AP. Ms. Kalabata, what would you say is the most important thing that can be done for small-scale farmers? And Mr. and Mrs. Elba, you heard from Vanessa about the importance of plant-based diets in reducing emissions. I mean, is this the kind of lifestyle change that you can see people in developed countries, in rich countries, actually embracing? And do you do it yourself?
Should you start, Vanessa?
No,
I'll just take a couple, and then there's probably a bit of overlap over here. The lady.
Sorry, I'm so small. Good morning, everybody. My first question is to Mr. Elba, if possible. Idris Elba, sorry, Ashton Harinag from Sky News. Idris Elba, what strikes me the most is on this panel, all 6 of you are people of colour. How important is that, I guess, in this conversation, that people who are directly impacted by climate change in the way that you're talking about are hearing from people that they relate to? And my second question, if that's okay, to Vanessa. You have been a huge part of this climate conversation, and that is a real credit to you. How important is it that you can change things from the inside and being part of events like this?
Okay, well maybe we'll just take those 2. So there's a nice spread there. To Agnes, you know, what's the most important impact that you've seen with smallholder farmers?
So do you want me to go?
Yep.
Good. Thank you. Listen, smallholder farmers live in production systems. They understand these systems very well. They lack certain things. In some of the countries they work in, they don't own the land that they work on. So addressing the challenge of land, access to land is extremely important for smallholder farmers because that's an asset that they need. So that's number 1. Number 2, they know how to produce, but they lack access to technologies. But for me, that's not even the most important thing. The most important thing, smallholder farmers need to be part of functional markets. Anybody that has a reason to make money, has an opportunity to make money, will go out there and find the opportunity to make money. I feel like most of the markets that these smallholder farmers live in are being serviced by long supply chains, and these farmers are locked out of the opportunity to develop, to really be part of earning incomes. And I guess part of what we'll be discussing and how we go forward is how we take advantage of supply chains that can help address the challenges that smallholder farmers face, that can help ensure that they are included. We've excluded them. We have supply chain that excludes smallholder farmers, that don't pay a living wage for smallholder farmers. We need to make sure that these things are reversed.
Maybe to the Elbas, there were a couple of questions there around diversification of diets, but also about how people relate to this and who they see.
I think that is important. Thank you for that question. I think what we're not here to do is to scrutinize the lives of the individuals, particularly those who are suffering through and maybe suffering the most by looking to what we particularly do in our lifestyle, because I think we're all here to look at the bigger picture and what the bigger players are doing and to see how they'll adapt and what changes they'll make. So this isn't really about the individuals, in my opinion. It really is about what the bigger leaders will step up and do.
But ultimately, I'd say that this forum is designed to discuss, and as you're writing down, there's an educative process that's happening. We hear from Vanessa directly what a plant-based diet could do for our world. So that educative strand is something that I do think Western culture can adopt. I do think we can all take a good look at how we eat. Can we adapt? Again, to Sabrina's point, that's for the individual, but I think that as a people, I think we can pay attention,
And then Vanessa, over to you.
Yeah, and I also just want to really add to that. Education is really important. I should say that I didn't know how certain foods would affect the planet. So I think that I just really want to add on what Idris and Sabrina have said. It's important to keep educating and creating awareness for people. But as we create this awareness, we shouldn't point fingers to individuals, because individuals are not responsible, for the climate crisis. It is the decisions of governments. It is the decisions of businesses. It is the decisions of large corporations that are responsible for the climate crisis. And many times people use individual accountability to take away the responsibility from, these big corporations. So let us keep educating and creating awareness as much as possible, so that people can gradually change, so that people can gradually become more cautious of what they do without feeling the guilt and condemnation. We should know where to direct our activism to, and that is to corporations, businesses, to governments that are fueling the climate crisis. And there's a question that was asked about the panel being for only people of color. And I just really want to say that people of color are on the front lines of the climate crisis, and it's important for us to tell our own stories, and it's important for the world to listen to our own stories, because we have been in places of, people telling our stories for us, but now it's time for you to listen to our stories. And there's a question about if there is change in the COP, and I think change is really on the streets. Change is what is happening outside, what young people are doing with the organizing and mobilizing of the climate strikes, like the one that we had yesterday. I think that is where real change is. And for me to be in some of these events inside the COP, like this one, I take these platforms to say all I need to say, because I don't know when I will get that platform again, because these platforms have not been available for many young people, especially from the most affected areas. The Global South is on the front lines of the climate crisis, of the food crisis, water crisis, but it is not on the front pages of the world's newspapers.
And I love that point about being allowed to tell our own stories, and and particularly from Africa. I think that's so critical.
Just to answer that young lady's question directly, I think Sabrina and I, we stand here as human beings first, okay, as part of this planet. But absolutely, yes, it is important for us as proud Africans to be a part of this debate, to have Vanessa to be a part of this debate in a day and age where a picture can have both Vanessa and Greta in a picture, but Vanessa gets cut out, except they're not just cutting out Vanessa, they're cutting out, as she said, a whole continent. And that continent is very central to this debate. It's very central to the solutions. If you consider, I was born in the 70s, and before the sort of revolution that we now say is responsible for damaging the ozone layer, before the aerosol can, all right? I was born in that era. Well, if you consider that Africa is the only landmass in the world where you can create a huge, if not leadership city sustainably well, with led by young people, we're in a position to influence that now. And so, yes, it is important that we have Vanessa, Idris, Sabrina, Agnes, everyone of color speaking up for this debate, because it's Africa that's right in the center of it.
Thank you. So maybe two more questions. Just your name and agency.
Thank you. Fred McCormack from EcoCops. We showcase the solutions and call out the greenwash. It's good to have DCI John Luther on the panel today. But yesterday, was all about education, and specifically education of our children. So my question is this. As a parent, what conversations are you having with your own children about the issues you're raising today? Because I truly believe that each of us as individuals have influence, and it's very important for us to exert that influence as wide as possible. So very much be interested to hear, as a parent, how do these conversations take place?
I'd love to just throw to Sanjay in on that one, because he's a proud father of a 2-year-old. He's just had a young girl who wrote, I had the pleasure of reading a beautiful note she wrote to him last night. I don't know if you want to share. Sorry to put the pressure on you.
Well, she's 2 years old, so she didn't quite write the note. My wife wrote the note, pretending it's her. But look, here's what I would say about that conversation with the next generation, with the younger people, with my nieces and nephews and family. It's a two-way conversation. And the most important thing we can do in some ways is sort of that next generation is kind of get out of the way. The second thing we can do is add to that youthful exuberance of action, wisdom, right? So for me, it's a two-way conversation. It's not about me, and I spend loads of time talking to kids at schools and universities, the whole 9 yards. The conversation has completely changed these days. Now I learn more from them than what I can impart.
Right, we're going to leave it there. But fantastic and huge passion, as you can see, and some wonderful stories. Thank you very much to such a wonderful panel. Privileged to be with you.